The alarm went off at 5:14 a.m. Ethan Calloway didn't slam it. He never did. He just reached out in the dark, pressed the button with the side of his thumb, and lay still for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to remember everything waiting for him on the other side of getting up, but short enough to keep from drowning in it. The ceiling of his apartment had a water stain shaped like a running dog. He'd noticed it the day they moved in, 2 years ago. Back when he still thought the place was temporary, he got up anyway. The kitchen was the size of a walk-in closet. He filled the coffee maker with what was left in the bag, barely enough, and while it hissed and dripped, he stood at the window and watched the street below. It was October in Whitfield, New Jersey, and the trees lining Garner Avenue were losing the last of their color. The gutter was full of brown leaves pressing against the drain. Nobody had cleaned it in weeks. His name was Ethan Calloway. He was 34 years old, though he looked a year or two older than that. Not worn down, just seasoned. There was a difference. His hands were the hands of a man who worked with them, calloused at the palms, scarred across 2 knuckles on the right from a compressor fitting that had slipped 3 years back. He stood just over 6 feet, kept his dark hair short, and had the kind of jaw that looked like it had learned to stay set. He worked at Kessler Automotive on Route 9 oil changes, brake jobs, transmission flushes, the occasional engine overhaul when the owner, Dale Kessler, trusted him enough to take it on. The pay was $19.40 an hour. Before taxes, he'd been there 4 years and had gotten 2 raises, both of them 50 cents. He was also, entirely and without help, raising a 7-year-old girl named Lily. Lily woke up 30 minutes after him, every morning, with the reliable precision of someone who had never needed to be told twice. She appeared in the doorway of the kitchen in her socks and a faded pink shirt that said, "Camp Whatever" on the front, a shirt that had belonged to a cousin she barely remembered, and she looked at the coffee maker the way most children her age looked at cartoon characters. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, Bug." She climbed onto the stool at the counter and propped her chin in her hands. She had her mother's eyes, that specific dark brown that turned amber near the center when the light hit right, and she had Ethan's way of going quiet when she was thinking hard about something. "We're out of the good cereal," she said. "I know. The other kind makes the milk taste like cardboard." "I know that too." She considered this with the solemnity it deserved. "Okay." He made her toast with peanut butter. Cut it diagonally, because she'd once told him, very seriously, that diagonal made it taste better, and he had never stopped doing it since. She ate, and he drank his coffee, and neither of them said much. The radio on the counter played a weather report. Cold front moving in by afternoon. Rain likely. This was their morning. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what Ethan had imagined at 22, in his other life, when he'd been midway through a degree in civil engineering at Rutgers and dating a girl named Sasha who laughed too loud and made every room feel smaller and better at the same time. That life had ended in a hospital corridor when Lily was 4 days old, and Sasha's heart simply, without warning or ceremony, stopped. He did not talk about that often. He did not need to. It was in everything: the way he cooked enough for 2, the way he kept Sasha's one photograph on the fridge, not as a shrine but as a presence, the way he said Lily's name sometimes with a gentleness that had nowhere else to go. He dropped Lily at school by 7:45, kissed the top of her head at the gate, and drove his 12-year-old Civic to the garage, with the heater blowing lukewarm air the whole way. At Kessler Automotive, Ethan was what Dale called the guy who doesn't complain. This was meant as a compliment. Dale was 56, heavyset, wore the same ball cap every day, and ran the garage the way certain men run their lives. By inertia and stubbornness, mostly, with occasional good instincts. He liked Ethan. He also underpaid him. These 2 facts coexisted without apparent conflict. There were 3 other mechanics. Pete, who was 26 and funny. Marcus, who was 40 and kept to himself. And Ronnie, who was 50 and had bad knees and called everyone chief. They got along in the way men who spend 8 hours a day under cars get along, not intimately, but reliably. Ethan was good at his job. Better than good. He had a spatial intuition for engines that surprised people, the ability to listen to a running motor and locate the dysfunction the way a musician hears a wrong note. He could have gone somewhere with it. He still thought about that sometimes. He just never thought about it for too long. At lunch, he got a letter from his landlord, Gary Prentice, forwarded through the super. It was the third notice about the back rent. 2 months, $2,340. The letter had the word legal action in the second paragraph, in the same bland font as everything else, which somehow made it worse. He folded it, put it in his back pocket, and went back to the Jeep Cherokee on the lift. He did not stop working until his shift ended at 5:30. It was raining by the time Ethan pulled out of the garage lot. Not a light rain. The kind that comes in fast, sideways. The kind that makes everything beyond 30 yards disappear into gray. The Civic's wipers were doing their best, which was not particularly impressive. He drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. Route 17 was backed up. So he cut over to Meridian Boulevard, an older 2-lane road that ran through the edge of what used to be light industrial, now mostly vacant lots, and the occasional still operating warehouse. It was darker out here. The streetlights were spread thin. The pavement was the kind of old blacktop that gets slick the moment water hits it. He was passing the third of 4 storage facilities on the right side, the one with the broken gate that had been broken since at least last spring when it happened. He heard it before he saw it. A shriek of tires, long, desperate, then a concussive bang that he felt in his chest before his brain processed it as sound, then silence, and then the hiss of rain, and then a low groaning of metal settling. He braked, looked left. A black Mercedes, the kind that costs more than some houses, had left the road at the bend about 40 yards ahead of him. It had clipped the guardrail, flipped once, or at most twice, judging by the damage, and come to rest on its passenger side against the concrete base of an old utility pole. Steam was rising from the hood. The front windshield was gone entirely. One wheel was still spinning slowly in the air, indifferent to everything. Ethan pulled to the shoulder and was out of the car in the same motion. He ran. He was aware, in some back corner of his mind, of another car stopped on the far side, a sedan. Its hazards on. The driver standing outside holding a phone to their ear, but not moving toward the wreck, standing, watching, waiting for someone else to go first. He didn't think about that. He just ran. The rain was hard enough that he was soaked before he reached the car. He dropped to one knee on the wet pavement and looked through what had been the driver's side window, now facing up like a skylight. Inside, a woman, seat, belted, hanging sideways in the harness, unconscious. 40s, maybe. Dark hair matted across her face, a cut above her right eyebrow, bleeding freely, mixing with the rain that was falling in through the shattered window. He smelled fuel, not a faint smell, a strong one. "Hey," he said, sharp. "Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. He reached in, got his hand to her neck. Pulse fast, but there. She was breathing. The fuel smell got stronger. He looked toward the rear of the car and saw the shimmer, the thin, dark river of it spreading across the road in the rain. Not a lot yet, but heading toward the exhaust pipe, which was still hot. He made a decision in about half a second. He couldn't move the car. He couldn't stop the fuel. He could move her. He got both arms through the window, got one under her shoulders and one behind her head the way he'd learned briefly, a long time ago, in a context he didn't often explain, and he released the seatbelt with his elbow, which took 3 tries and one badly scraped forearm. She came free and he pulled, slowly, trying to keep her spine as stable as he could manage, while also being aware that he had maybe 30 seconds before the math stopped working in his favor. He got her out. He got her across the pavement, across the shoulder gravel, and down into the shallow drainage ditch on the far side of the road. It was wet and cold and not comfortable. It was also about 12 feet from the car. 12 feet turned out to be enough. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It was a deep, concussive whump, followed by a wall of heat and a hard orange light that turned the rain to steam in a 10-foot radius. The rear of the car went up, then the rest of it. The glass that was left blew outward in a flat pattern. Ethan was crouched over the woman in the ditch, his arms bracketing her head, his back to the blast. He felt the heat across his shoulders like a hand pressing hard. The sound was enormous. Then it was over. Just rain, and burning metal, and the distant wail of something, an alarm, somewhere. Triggered by the concussion, he sat back on his heels and looked at her. She was still unconscious. The cut on her forehead was worse than he'd thought. Scalp wounds bleed disproportionately. He knew that, but her breathing was steady. No visible deformation at the neck. Pupils, when he checked with his phone light, were equal and reactive. Probably a concussion. Possibly worse. He didn't have the equipment to know. He could hear sirens now. Someone had called. Maybe the sedan driver. Maybe someone else. He took off his jacket, his one decent jacket, a heavy canvas work coat, and spread it over her. Then he put 2 fingers against her carotid again. Still steady, still there. She was going to be okay. He stayed in the ditch with her, in the rain, until the ambulance arrived. She came to slowly, the way people do when the brain is protecting itself, swimming up through layers before breaking the surface. The first thing she registered was cold. The second was a voice low, calm, saying her name. But she didn't understand how anyone here could know her name. She hadn't said it. She opened her eyes. Rain. A man's face above her, haloed faintly by the orange light of something burning not far away. He was soaked. Dark hair plastered flat. A jaw that looked like it had been chiseled, rather than grown. His eyes were the specific gray of overcast sky, serious, focused. Watching her with the practiced assessment of someone who had done this before. "Don't move yet," he said. "Give it a second." She blinked. Her head hurt enormously. Her shoulder felt wrong. She was lying in what was clearly a ditch. Soaked through, cold in a way that went past uncomfortable and into significant. "What happened?" she said. It came out as a statement, rather than a question. "You went off the road. Your car's gone. There was a fuel leak." He paused. "You're okay. Your neck is fine. I was careful. You'll have a concussion probably, but you're okay." She turned her head slightly and saw the burning wreck. The Mercedes. She recognized the shape of it, or what was left. She looked back at him. "You got me out of that." It wasn't a question either. She could tell from the way he was kneeling, the angle, the slight favoring of his left side where his jacket was gone, that he'd been in the water with her. He smelled faintly of gasoline and singed fabric. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. Not in the disoriented way of someone who didn't understand where she was. In the deliberate way of someone filing information. "Alyssa Wells," she said. "My name." "Before you ask." "Wasn't going to ask," he said. "People always ask." He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there. He was watching the road, tracking the approaching lights. The ambulance reached them 90 seconds later. 2 paramedics came down the embankment with a backboard and a portable light. They immediately began their assessment. The man, she still didn't know his name, stepped back and out of the way the moment they arrived. With the particular quality of stepping aside that belongs to people who help and then disappear. "Wait," she said, to the paramedic, and also, somehow, past him. But by the time they'd gotten the collar on her and the board under her, and started the carry to the road, she could see his car, an old silver Civic. She registered the make without thinking about it, pulling back onto Meridian Boulevard. No name, no waiting around, no asking for anything. She filed that too. The hospital was St. Catherine's Medical Center in Clifton, 20 minutes from the accident site. Alyssa Wells had a mild concussion, a fractured collarbone, 4 stitches above her right eyebrow, and a collection of bruises that would take 3 weeks to fully surface. The attending physician told her she was lucky. She said she knew. She had a way of saying things that communicated she already knew them, without making the person telling her feel dismissed. It was a skill she'd spent years developing. By 9 p.m., the room had transformed. Her assistant, a precise, exhausted-looking man named Graham Finch, had arrived with her phone, laptop, and a set of clothes. Her head of security, a former federal agent named Dennis Pruitt, was stationed in the hallway. A publicist was fielding calls. Her CFO had sent flowers and a message that was, characteristically, primarily concerned with the board meeting on Thursday. The media had the story. Of course they did. Alyssa Wells, 41 years old, was the founder and chief executive officer of Wells Infrastructure Group, a mid-Atlantic infrastructure development and engineering firm that had grown, over 16 years, from a two-person consultancy in a rented office in Hoboken to a $2.3 billion enterprise with projects in 11 states. She had been on the cover of 3 business publications. She had testified before a Senate subcommittee on infrastructure spending. She had, twice, been listed on national rankings of influential executives. She was also, her close staff would tell you privately, a person who was very difficult to help because she was very accustomed to not needing it. "The man who pulled me out," she said to Graham, when the room had settled slightly. "Find him." Graham had his tablet ready. "We're already looking. The paramedics couldn't give us a name. He was gone before they thought to get one. I've requested the traffic camera footage from the city. And there should be one camera on the utility pole at the northern end of that stretch that might have, get me the plate number from the silver Civic." Graham looked at her. "You got the plate?" "First 3 letters. VJR. She paused. "New Jersey registration. Looked like a 2012 or 2013 Honda." The passenger side mirror was taped. Graham wrote it down without comment. He had worked for Alyssa for 6 years and had long since stopped being surprised by her retention. "How long?" "I'll have a name for you by morning." She nodded, then looked at the ceiling. Her shoulder throbbed. Her head was pressure and static. The doctor had told her to rest. She was not resting. She was thinking about the man in the rain. The way he'd said, "Don't move yet," not as a command, but as the kind of instruction that comes from knowing, as opposed to the kind that comes from wanting to appear in control. The way he'd stepped back the moment the professionals arrived. The way he'd been completely, utterly unconcerned with who she was. Most people, in her experience, were eventually concerned with who she was. By 7:40 the next morning, Graham had a name. Ethan Callaway, 34, address on Garner Avenue in Whitfield, employed at Kessler Automotive. One daughter, Lily, age 7. No criminal record, no civil judgments, no social media presence of any significance. A background as clean and unremarkable as a blank sheet of paper, except for one thing Graham flagged and then set aside as probably irrelevant. 2 years at Rutgers School of Engineering. Incomplete, a decade ago. Alyssa read the file twice. Then she said, "Don't contact him yet." What Graham's file didn't say, because files never do, was this. On the Tuesday morning after the accident, Ethan Callaway's landlord, Gary Prentice, came in person to the apartment and knocked on the door at 8 a.m. Lily had already left for school. Ethan was in jeans and no shirt, drinking coffee and running through the math again, the same math he'd been running through for 3 weeks, trying to find a version of it that worked. There wasn't one. Prentice was not a cruel man. He was a practical one, which in some circumstances amounts to the same thing. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his jacket pockets and said that he needed the back rent by the end of the month, or he would have to begin proceedings. He said it without relish. He said it the way a dentist says something is going to hurt. "I understand," Ethan said. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I know your situation. I'll figure it out." Prentice left. Ethan stood in his kitchen and looked at the water stain on the ceiling for a while. The dog shape. He'd gotten so used to it he sometimes forgot it was there. The money problem had several parts. The back rent was $2,340. Lily's prescription for the inhaler she needed, she'd had mild asthma since she was 3, had been partially covered by the insurance his job provided, but the coverage had changed at the start of the year and was now meaningfully worse. The copay for a 90-day supply was $180 now. It used to be $40. He'd stretched the last one as far as he could. He needed to refill it this week, and Pete, the youngest mechanic at the garage, had borrowed $200 from him in September for a car payment and hadn't mentioned it since. Ethan hadn't mentioned it either. Pete had a kid too. None of this made Ethan angry. That was the thing about him that people who knew him couldn't quite explain. He wasn't resigned. Exactly, he didn't have the flat affect of a man who'd stopped caring. He was still in it, still present. He just didn't waste energy on the parts he couldn't change. He got to work, and on his lunch break he went to the CVS 2 blocks away and picked up a refill for Lily's inhaler. He put it on his credit card, which was at $3,200 of a $3,500 limit. He put the receipt in his wallet and didn't look at the balance. On the way back to the garage, he passed a woman struggling with a flat tire in the parking lot of the strip mall. A small woman in her 60s, visibly stressed, trying to read the owner's manual of a minivan in the rain. He stopped, changed the tire in 11 minutes, refused her money, and was back at his workbench at 1:04. He was 2 minutes late. Dale didn't say anything. Dale had seen Ethan's hands when he came in oil, not fresh and new. "Next time clock back in first," Dale said. "Yeah," said Ethan. "Sorry." He wasn't sorry. But he said it anyway, because it cost nothing and kept the peace. And keeping the peace was the kind of thing that mattered when you were one bad week from losing your apartment. There was also the matter of what people thought of him. Though he tried not to care about it, and mostly succeeded. That same week, a man had come in driving a Range Rover with a service light on mid-50s, the kind of sunburn that comes from ski vacations rather than outdoor labor, wearing a quarter zip that cost more than Ethan's monthly groceries. He'd stood at the counter and looked at Ethan and asked, without apparent irony, whether there was someone else he could speak to. Someone more senior. "I'm the senior mechanic," Ethan said. The man had looked him over. The stained coveralls. The hands. The functional wristwatch that had a cracked crystal on the face. "Right," the man said, in a tone that contained everything he wasn't saying. Ethan had diagnosed the issue, a faulty MAF sensor, and a secondary evap code that had been misread by the dealership in 8 minutes. Fixed it in 40, the man had taken the car without a word of thanks and left a review online that said the staff were professional enough, I suppose. Ethan had read the review on his phone at the end of the day, eating a sandwich at his workbench. He'd set the phone down, finished the sandwich, and gone back to the Subaru with the exhaust issue that was waiting on the lift. Some things you let pass. Not because you don't notice them, but because the energy you'd spend on them is energy you need somewhere else. Lily's inhaler, the rent letter, the credit card balance approaching its ceiling. These were the real weights. Everything else was just weather. The thing was, Ethan Callaway had not always been this steady. He'd had his years of anger. Quiet anger. The internal kind. The kind that doesn't break furniture, but does cost you sleep. After Sasha died, he'd gone through a period he didn't discuss, when Lily was an infant and he was 26, and the engineering degree was gone, and the grief was so heavy that getting out of bed was a daily act of will rather than reflex. He'd come through it slowly, and what he'd come out with, on the other side, was a specific calibration. The things worth spending yourself on, and the things that weren't. Lily was worth it. His work was worth it. The people around him, who needed things he could give, worth it. The quarterly performance review he'd never get. The advancement that Dale wouldn't think to offer because Dale operated on inertia. The 1,000 small indignities of being competent in a context that didn't fully see you. Not worth the energy. He'd learned to put those down. He was still learning. She came on a Thursday, 11 days after the accident. The rain was gone. It was a cold, dry morning. The sky the specific pale blue that only happens in late October in New Jersey, when the humidity finally breaks. Ethan was under a 2019 F-150 with a clutch problem when Ronnie came over and said, in a voice that was trying hard to sound casual and failing, "Hey, Callaway. Lady outside." Suit. Ethan rolled out on the creeper. Wiped his hands on a shop rag. She was standing at the entrance to the garage bay, on the customer side of the yellow line. She was wearing a dark charcoal blazer over a gray turtleneck, tailored trousers, low-heeled boots. She held a leather portfolio at her side and wore no jewelry except small gold studs at her ears. She looked like money, but not ostentatious money, the kind that has existed long enough to become understated. She had a line of 4 stitches at the right edge of her eyebrow. It was the only thing that didn't fit the composure. Ethan stood. He looked at her. He didn't recognize her immediately, not because she was unrecognizable, but because context changes things. He'd seen her in the dark and the rain, bleeding, lying in a ditch. In the category of human being who needed help, she had been as specific and individual as anyone. Here, in the fluorescent light of a garage bay, in that suit, she occupied a different category entirely. And his brain took a moment to reconcile them. Then she tilted her head slightly, and something in the angle of it, the watchfulness, the quality of being looked at without being judged, resolved it. "Mr. Calloway," she said. He heard Pete behind him stop what he was doing. He heard Ronnie make a small, appreciative sound. "Miss Wells," he said. "A beat." "You know who I am," she said. "You were in the news a lot that week." He paused. "You okay?" The collarbone. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. Healing. 4 more weeks in the brace. She glanced at the shop around her with clear curiosity, but no condescension. "Can we talk somewhere?" They went to Dale's office. Dale, who had come out to see what the commotion was, one look at Alyssa and immediately offered his office without being asked, something Ethan had never seen him do for anyone in 4 years. The office smelled like motor oil and old coffee. Alyssa sat in the chair across from the desk. Ethan sat on the edge of the desk itself, which felt right. It was Dale's desk, not his. He was just visiting. "Thank you," she said. "I want to say that first. Without preamble. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to." The tone was neither warm nor cold. It was precise. "You pulled me out of a vehicle that exploded roughly 12 seconds after you got me clear. You stayed with me until the paramedics arrived. You didn't wait around for acknowledgement, and you didn't leave any information." She paused. "People don't do that. Some do. Not in my experience." Ethan looked at her. "What do you need, Miss Wells?" The question seemed to catch her slightly. Not off guard, he thought, but recalibrated. She wasn't accustomed to being moved from gratitude to function that quickly. "I'd like to help you," she said. "In whatever way is useful. I'm fine. You have $1,800 in your checking account. Your rent is 14 days late. Your daughter's medical costs have increased significantly this year. You drive a car with a failing transmission." She said it without triumph, just facts. Delivered the way engineers deliver load calculations. "I had you looked into. I want to be transparent about that." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant violation of privacy," he said at last. "It is. I'm sorry." And the strange thing was that she meant it. "I needed to know who you were. I understand if that bothers you. It does." He looked out the small office window at the garage bay. Pete was very obviously pretending to work. "You being sorry for it doesn't fix the fact that you did it." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." Another pause. Something in the room was recalibrating. "I don't want money," Ethan said. "I know. I want to be clear about that. I heard you." She uncrossed her legs, sat forward slightly. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering." She seemed to be choosing the word carefully. "A relationship of mutual benefit. Properly structured. If you're interested." He looked at her for a long time. "I'll think about it," he said. He told her he'd think about it. He did not tell her yes, but over the next 3 weeks, things changed anyway. The first thing was the rent. Ethan came home on a Friday to find an envelope slid under his door, not from Prentice, but from Prentice's property management company. Inside was a letter informing him that the back balance had been cleared by an anonymous payment, and that going forward, his monthly rate was being reduced to $1,050 from $1,170, citing a revised lease agreement. The signature at the bottom was an entity called Wig Holdings, LLC. Ethan stood in his hallway and read the letter twice. He knew enough about corporate naming conventions to recognize a holding company when he saw one. He made a call, got voicemail, left a message that was polite and short. "Miss Wells, I appreciate the intent. We need to talk about what this means." She called back in 40 minutes. "I thought you said you weren't offering charity," he said. "It's not charity. It's a correction." Her voice over the phone was the same as in person. No warmer. No cooler. Just present. "Your landlord was overcharging for the unit relative to the comparable market rate in that area. I renegotiated on behalf of the building's new managing entity. You happen to benefit. So do the other 12 tenants in that building." He hadn't thought about the other tenants. "You bought his building," Ethan said. A brief pause. "WIG has a residential portfolio. It was a reasonable acquisition." He almost laughed. He wasn't sure if it was funny or extraordinary, or both. The second thing was Lily. 2 weeks after the rent letter, Ethan got a call from the pharmacy doctor. Carolyn Hartley's office had pre-authorized a new maintenance plan for Lily's asthma management through a pediatric specialist practice in Clifton that Ethan had never been able to afford. The call said that Lily had been enrolled in their care program, that the cost was covered by a medical assistance grant administered by the Whitfield Community Health Initiative, and that her first appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ethan drove to that appointment. He sat in the waiting room with Lily, who was reading a book about marine mammals with the same intensity she brought to most things, and he thought about what it meant that someone had decided to help him without asking permission. The doctor was thorough. Lily sat on the examination table and answered questions in complete sentences, which made the doctor smile. On the way home, Lily said, "That was a nicer doctor than the last one." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Did something change?" He thought about how to answer that. "Maybe," he said. The third thing was harder to attribute directly, but Ethan attributed it anyway. A call from Dale Kessler. On a Wednesday morning before Ethan got in, saying that the garage had been selected for a fleet service contract with a regional logistics company, 18 vehicles to be maintained on a quarterly rotation, a contract worth roughly $140,000 a year. Dale was thrilled. He announced it to the whole shop. He also gave everyone a raise. Ethan's went to $23.50 an hour. Ethan looked up the logistics company that afternoon. Its registered agent was WIG Operational Services. He called again. "You're doing it again," he said. "I'm directing routine operational contracts to qualified service providers. Kessler Automotive is not the kind of vendor you'd find through your normal channels." "You'd be surprised," she said. "I've been reviewing our vehicle maintenance costs. Your employer does good work at a fair price. Alyssa." He'd started using her first name without quite deciding to. She hadn't corrected him. "Why are you doing it like this?" "Why not just, because you said no," she said simply. "And I respected that. But I also think the circumstances that created your situation are not entirely about your choices, and I don't think respecting your answer means I have to pretend I can't do anything." A pause. "Is that wrong?" He thought about it. "I don't know yet," he said. It arrived on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the accident, in the form of a letter from an attorney. The letter was from Crandall and Voss LLP, representing a development company called Meridian Properties, a name that carried a certain irony, given where the accident had happened. The letter informed Dale Kessler that Kessler Automotive was in breach of zoning compliance regulations related to the storage of automotive fluids, and that Meridian Properties, as the owner of adjacent parcels on Route 9, was initiating civil proceedings to compel remediation. The demands were specific and expensive: $75,000 in remediation bonds, a full environmental assessment of the property, and a 60-day operational pause. The letter came on Tuesday. By Thursday, 2 men from Meridian Properties came to the shop in person, not lawyers, but the other kind of representative. Large, calm, wearing business casual in the way that's meant to feel like a uniform. They asked to speak to the owner. Dale came out, and they spoke to him quietly, in the parking lot, for about 12 minutes. Dale came back and looking the way people look when they've been told something that hasn't fully landed yet. They want us gone, he said to the shop at large. They've been buying up this stretch of Route 9. They want to develop. We're apparently an obstacle. He sat down on a stool. The zoning thing is mostly cover. We're compliant, but it costs money to prove that. And apparently they're betting I don't have the money to fight. Pete said something colorful. Marcus said nothing. Ronnie said, "What do we do?" Dale looked at Ethan. Ethan had been quiet through all of this, not passive present. He'd been watching the two men through the bay window as they spoke with Dale, and he'd noticed things. The way the taller one held his phone low and angled, possibly recording. The way they'd parked blocking the secondary exit. The way neither of them had introduced themselves by name. They didn't give you business cards, Ethan said. What? Those two. They didn't give you cards. Didn't leave paperwork. Dale thought about it. No, that's because they're not here for a legal proceeding. They're here to see how you react. They want to know if you'll fold before they spend money on lawyers. Ethan stood. Do you have the original documentation on the storage compliance? Yeah, somewhere. Find it. I'm going to take photos of the current setup before they touch anything. He looked at Pete. Don't talk to anyone else from Meridian who shows up without a verified attorney present. Get that on your phone. He moved through the shop methodically, photographing the chemical storage areas, the drainage channels, the containment basins, everything that demonstrated compliance with state standards. He'd read those standards once, when they'd upgraded the storage setup 3 years ago. He remembered most of it. That evening, he called the county zoning office and requested a copy of the most recent compliance inspection on the property. It was public record. It took him 40 minutes on hold. He also called Alyssa. He hadn't been sure he would, but he called. I'm not asking for intervention, he said. I want to be clear about that first. All right, but I think you might know the situation. Meridian Properties. A short silence. Then, I know of them. Commercial acquisition. Aggressive. They've been positioning in that corridor for about a year. Can you tell me if there's anything about this that's not what it looks like on the surface? She was quiet for a moment. Their primary investor has a lawsuit pending from a previous acquisition that involved similar tactics, zoning pressure, manufactured compliance complaints. The lawsuit is in discovery. They need Kessler's parcel resolved before that case goes to deposition, or the pattern starts to look like a pattern. Ethan absorbed that. So there's actually more risk for them in a fight than for Dale. Significantly more risk. If Dale contests this and it drags into the spring, it creates a paper trail they can't afford right now. Thank you, Ethan. Her voice had something in it that wasn't quite concern but was adjacent to it. Be careful. These aren't bad people in the classic sense. They're just transactional. When the math changes, they'll want a face-saving exit. I know, he said. Give them one. The next morning, Ethan had Dale send a formal response to Crandall and Voss, drafted with the help of a legal aid attorney that a community organization Ethan had quietly contacted without telling Dale had connected them with. The response was 3 pages. It attached the county compliance documentation. It noted, in professional and specific language, the discovery proceedings in the existing lawsuit against Meridian's primary backer. It invited further dialogue. Meridian Properties did not respond. 2 weeks later, their attorney sent a brief letter withdrawing the complaint. Dale never entirely understood what had happened. He bought Ethan lunch. A good lunch, actually not the diner, but the Italian place on the corner that Ethan usually only went to when Lily had a good report card. How did you know all that? Dale asked, over pasta. I looked into it, Ethan said. Since when do you know legal stuff? Since I had a reason to learn it. Dale nodded slowly, in the way of a man accepting something without fully understanding it. You ever think about doing something else, besides the garage? It was not the first time someone had asked. It was the first time Ethan didn't immediately say no. Alyssa Wells had built her career on assessment. It was, at its core, what she did. She looked at a thing. A project, a market, a team, a risk. and she assessed it with a precision that most people found either impressive or unsettling, depending on where they were in the equation. She had assessed Ethan Callaway. She had the file. She had the data. She had the follow-up information that came from having people quietly watching the Kessler situation. From the reports Graham gave her on the apartment building, from the pediatric clinic's intake records that she had no business seeing but had seen anyway, and had felt a specific discomfort about that she hadn't felt about this kind of information in years. What the assessment didn't account for was this. On a Saturday morning, 3 days after the Meridian situation resolved, she drove herself not with Dennis, not with Graham, to the park off Garner Avenue in Whitfield. It was a small park. A rectangle of grass. A basketball half-court. A climbing structure. 3 benches. Not much. She sat on the middle bench with a coffee from the place across the street. And she watched. Ethan Callaway was on the climbing structure, not supervising it on it. He was at the top of the climbing frame, maybe 8 feet off the ground, following a small girl with dark hair who was narrating, at some length, the geography of what appeared to be an imaginary kingdom she was establishing across the structure's various platforms. He was listening with the complete, absolute attention of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing more important to do. The little girl Lily pointed at something in the distance, across the park. She said something. Ethan looked where she was pointing, nodded seriously, said something back. Lily laughed a real laugh, the unconscious kind, the kind that hasn't been edited yet. Alyssa sat on the bench for 40 minutes. She was not a sentimental person. She had not cried at her own company's IPO. When a journalist asked how she felt, she had sat across from a Senate subcommittee chair and held his eye for 30 seconds of silence before he blinked. She had, twice, made decisions that cost hundreds of people their jobs at subsidiaries she'd had to restructure. And she had made those decisions without flinching because the alternative was losing everything. But she sat on the bench for 40 minutes, and she felt, in a way that was uncomfortable and specific, the difference between what she had built and what he had. She had more, objectively, measurably. By every metric her industry used, he had something she couldn't put in a metric. On the way back to her car, she passed the bench on the other side of the path, and Ethan was already there. Lily had apparently moved on to the swings, and he looked up when she was close enough, and for a second neither of them said anything. "Were you watching us?" he asked, not accusatory, just asking. "Yes," she said. She didn't see the point of pretending otherwise. He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down." She sat. "I want to tell you something," he said. Not in the context of whatever this arrangement is. He was looking at the park, not at her. "When I was in the ditch with you, before the paramedics got there, you were still unconscious, but you said something." She turned to look at him. "What did I say?" "You said I've got it." He paused. "Just that. 3 times. I've got it." She was quiet. "I think about that," he said. "What it means, that those were the words your brain reached for when it couldn't think." She looked at the park. At Lily on the swings, pumping her legs with determination. "It means I've been carrying things alone for a very long time," she said. The precision in her voice was still there. "But it was doing different work now." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Me too." The offer came formally, in writing, on a Wednesday morning. Graham delivered it to the garage, a sealed envelope, no letterhead on the outside. Ethan opened it at his workbench, standing up, grease on his hands. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced. Alyssa's letterhead, but not her usual correspondence style, more direct, more personal. She had written it herself, he could tell. The substance was this. Wells Infrastructure Group was establishing a new division, infrastructure operations and field quality assessment, the work of visiting active project sites and evaluating the gap between engineering design and on-the-ground execution. It was the kind of work that required, she wrote, someone who can walk into a complex operational environment, identify what's actually happening, rather than what the documentation says is happening, and explain the difference to people who may not want to hear it. The position paid $84,000 a year, with benefits, and came with a training period. She had noted, at the bottom, in handwriting rather than type. This is not a gift. The position is real, and the need is real. You would be expected to do the work. You can tell me no. Ethan read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket and finished the brake job he was in the middle of. He told Dale at the end of the shift. Dale was quiet for a long time. He turned his ball cap around on his head, which was what he did when he was thinking. That's a good opportunity, Dale said finally. I know. I'd give you a reference. Good one. I know that too. You going to take it? Ethan was quiet for a moment. I'm going to negotiate, he said. Dale blinked. Negotiate. The starting salary is fair, but the training period is vague. I want it specified. And I want a clause that allows for remote work 2 days a week until Lily's school situation is settled. He paused. And I want the garage to keep the fleet contract. That has nothing to do with me. Dale stared at him. Then he started laughing, a genuine, surprised laugh that he hadn't quite intended. You've been holding out on me for 4 years, Dale said. Little bit, Ethan admitted. He met with Alyssa 3 days later. Not at her office, at a coffee shop in Montclair that was busy enough to be anonymous. She came alone. He came alone. They sat across from each other with coffee between them, and he laid out what he wanted, point by point, clearly and without apology. She listened. She counter-proposed on one point. He accepted the counter and held on the other two. She agreed. You know, she said. At the end, most people, when they get offered something generous, don't immediately negotiate. Most people don't know what they're worth, he said. She looked at him, that particular look she had, the one that was filing rather than judging. No, she said. They don't. It was March by then, and the light had started to come back. Lily stood at the bathroom mirror in the apartment on Garner Avenue, the same apartment. Still. Because they hadn't moved, because some things you change and some things you keep, and she was attempting, with great concentration and mixed results, to braid her own hair. She had watched 3 tutorials. She had not yet mastered it. She was not close to quitting. Ethan was in the kitchen, making coffee that was better than it used to be, because he'd bought a real bag for the first time in a while, and he was reading something on his tablet project documentation for a bridge rehabilitation site in central Pennsylvania, his first solo assessment assignment, coming in 3 weeks. He was nervous about it, not the competence part that he was fine on. The part where he had to walk into a room full of engineers with more credentials than him and tell them something they didn't want to hear. He was working on that. His phone buzzed. A text from Alyssa. Logistics confirmed for site visit. Also, did Lily try the braid tutorial? He looked up from the phone. From the bathroom, a small voice said, Dad, it's kind of lopsided. Lopsided is a style, he called back. Is it though? Yes. Very popular in Paris. A pause. Then, okay, he typed back to Alyssa. 3rd attempt this morning. Progress. The response came quickly. Tell her from me that getting it wrong 3 times is the work. He smiled at that. He set the phone down and picked up the coffee and stood at the window the same way he always did, looking at Garner Avenue in the morning light. The gutter was clear. Someone had finally cleaned the drain. The water stain on the ceiling still looked like a running dog. He'd stopped forgetting it was there. He'd started thinking of it differently, not as evidence of a temporary place, but as a specific, irrepeatable feature of a specific life that had, against some odds, turned out to be his. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair honestly somewhat lopsided, jacket half-zipped, book bag over one shoulder. Diagonal, she said. He cut the toast. She sat at the counter and propped her chin in her hands and looked at him the way she sometimes did, the look that was her mother's eyes in her father's kid, that specific amber and dark brown that happened when the light hit right. And she said, Dad, you seem different lately. Different, how? She considered this with the solemnity it deserved. Like you know something, she said. He thought about a road in the rain and a burning car and 30 seconds of decision, and how 30 seconds can be longer than years if you use them right. Maybe, he said. A little. She nodded. satisfied with this answer, and ate her toast. Outside, the light was doing what March light does in New Jersey tentative. Promising, not quite believing in itself yet. But there. Definitely there. A single act, 30 seconds in the rain, in a ditch beside a burning road, and two lives that had been moving separately, each carrying what the other lacked, found their way towards something neither of them had planned for. Neither of them would call it luck. They would both call it, eventually, the thing that happened because someone didn't stop to think about whether it was worth it and just went.